Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Chandra Matthews, and I'm the Director of Programs here at Next 50 Initiative. We are very excited about offering the Advancing Equity and Aging funding opportunity and eager to offer some information specific to the funding opportunity for you today. We're going to go over just a few housekeeping items to start. Maybe if we can get the PowerPoint up. This session is going to be recorded, so it will be available to you after the session. We'll also have closed captioning available during the presentation, so click on the closed caption icon at the bottom of your screen if that would be beneficial to you. And then also we'll do a Q&A session after the short presentation, so please utilize that Q&A feature at the bottom to ask any questions that you might have, and we will get to those as we go. Now I'll introduce our team who will be presenting the information to you today about advancing equity in aging, and we'll field as many questions as possible. Jillian Kelly is here today. She's the Senior Program Officer at Next 50 Initiative, and Roop Wazir is also with us today, who is a Program Officer here at Next 50. Jillian, Roop, I'll let you all take it from here.
Great, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. For those of you unfamiliar with us, I'd like to offer just a little background about who we are. Next 50 Initiative is a Colorado-based private foundation supporting efforts to improve the lives of older adults 50 plus and their caregivers. We were formed in 2016 through the sale of Innovage, a nonprofit PACE program of all-inclusive care for the elderly provider. We were created as an independent nonprofit entity and retained our focus on serving older adult populations. As part of our formation agreement, 80% of the initial corpus and any associated investment income is restricted to benefit residents of Colorado, and 20% is unrestricted.
This slide shows a visual here of our funding and investment strategy as an organization. So Next 50 Initiative is about 7 years old. And last year, we underwent a process to really lock down our funding and investment strategy and what we're hoping to accomplish. You can see that we've identified goals, strategies, and tactics to meet those goals. And if you head to our website, you can learn a lot more about our funding and investment strategy. You'll see the link to that in the chat. But the Advancing Equity in Aging opportunity came out of this strategy.
From our funding and investment strategy, we have 4 overarching goals. The first is to improve the lives of older adults and their caregivers. The second, to strengthen the capacity of organizations serving older adults. Third, we want to support new and innovative approaches to aging. And fourth, to reduce ageism. I will say all of our funding opportunities are linked to these goals. And in this particular application, we do ask all applicants to select which of these 4 goals they intend to focus on and how their own organizational or program goals are connected to our overarching goals.
So let's talk about advancing equity here. Specifically, this is obviously the opportunity that is open now. And we have identified the purpose of this opportunity as providing financial support to organizations that serve or seek to serve historically marginalized communities. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means to us here in a moment. We're hoping to address systemic barriers to care for older adults with intersectional identities and increase the capacity of organizations who serve or seek to serve historically marginalized older adults and caregivers. And you can see who is eligible to apply here. So different kinds of nonprofits, as well as government entities. Oh, and you'll see a link in the chat there to our website where you can see all of the information about this funding opportunity.
So just to make sure we're all on the same page, we define marginalized as a person or group consistently treated as insignificant or peripheral on the margin, including individuals or groups lacking access to basic services and opportunities. We're also looking at how intersectional identities impact older adults and their ability to access needed services and supports. Intersectionality considers how various dimensions such as race, ability, gender, class, ethnicity, age, and other identities intersect and influence the experiences of marginalized individuals.
So this is some information about the application itself. It is open now and will close on August 16th. You can use our online system to submit your application. We'll provide a little bit more information at the end about what that system looks like as we switched over to a different system called Flux than what we had been using historically. Award notifications will be made in November. And this opportunity allows for single year grant requests with a maximum request of up to $100,000. We have up to $2 million available to award for this funding opportunity. And we do expect that we will receive significantly more requests than we will be able to fund.
So for this targeted funding opportunity, we seek to fund programs, projects, and/or organizations that exclusively focus on 2 or more of the older adult populations listed below. So these include low-income older adults, rural, frontier, older adults from communities of color, LGBTQ+ identifying older adults, immigrant and refugee older adults, and older adults experiencing a physical, cognitive, or behavioral disability, and other, which we allow applicants to define another marginalized group if you see fit. If your organization's CEO, executive director, and/or 51% or more of the leadership team or board identify as people of color, your organizational focus and/or eligible program or project focus may be on 1 or more of these populations.
Here we go over what will not be funded, what's not eligible for funding, and you can see this list on our website as well. But these are some of the things, I'll run through them quickly. We do not fund subgrants to individuals or other organizations. Universities are not eligible for this opportunity, nor are LLCs or for-profit organizations. We do require that all requests meet 2 of the outlined marginalized criteria that Root mentioned on the last slide, with the exception of if the leadership of the organization meets the criteria listed there. We don't fund lobbying, political campaigns, or requests with the goal of supporting a specific political position. We do not fund requests that include payment or reimbursement of individual bills, such as medical bills, rental assistance, utility assistance, rental fees. If you are considering a request that includes any of these things, please call ahead of time so we can talk through exactly what your request might entail and let you know whether that will be eligible, as requests do get declined if they include any of these kinds of activities. Fundraising and general event sponsorship, type 3 non-functional integrated supporting organizations, or wet lab research. And if you're doing any kind of research project that you want to talk about and you're wondering whether it falls into that wet lab research category, then please give us a call. We can talk through the specifics.
Okay, let's talk about how applications will be evaluated. So we will be using multiple criteria, including but not limited to those listed here, and I'll go through them. Connection to marginalized older adults. We're looking for folks to demonstrate a connection to the marginalized aging populations that you're seeking to serve. Populations served, this is an eligibility requirement for this funding opportunity. So funding does need to exclusively focus on marginalized populations or those that we have listed. Commitment to DEI, so diversity, equity, and inclusions. We are asking all applicants to clearly demonstrate your organization's commitment to DEI, including thoughtful and intentional efforts to understand and promote these values as an organization. Clarity of goals and alignment with Next 50 initiative goals. Applicants must be able to articulate your organizational and or programmatic goals, but also align them with those 4 overarching goals that we had a few slides back. Use of funds. Applicants need to clearly describe how the requested funds will contribute to the achievement of the goals that you have listed. and how it will directly benefit the stated marginalized populations that you choose. Need for funds. Applicants must clearly describe their organization's financial need for requested funds. As Jillian said, we do expect to receive more applications than we will be able to fund. So we will consider both an organization's need for funding and its financial sustainability. If you have more questions about that, we do have our CFO, Sue, on the call, who will be happy to answer some of those questions in the Q&A. And lastly, thoroughness and timeliness of submission. The grant is due on August 16th at 5 p.m. Grant seekers must submit all grant materials on time to be considered for funding, and make sure that your attachments are readable and they're not password protected or anything like that.
So now we're going to move into the Q&A portion of today's webinar. You can use the Q&A feature to ask questions. Again, the webinar will be recorded and posted online. And if you have any specific questions about whether we would consider funding your specific request, then please reach out to us for a discovery call, and we will have information about how to do that on this slide deck at the end.
Great. Thank you, Jillian. Thank you, Roop, for great information. We have some questions flowing in, but we've also asked participants to submit questions in advance of the session. So one of the things that has come up a few times is what do we mean by exclusive focus on the populations listed? Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take that one. So yeah, as we said, the funding requested for this opportunity should be exclusively focused on marginalized populations, those that you choose from that list to serve. If you intend, for example, to request funding for a staff position, the funding requested should correlate with the expected number of marginalized older adults that staff member will be working with. For example, if the staff will be working with older adults, of which 30% or 50% are communities of color or low income, then you can request 50% of that staff's salary. If the staff is going to work exclusively with Spanish-speaking low-income older adults, you could request 100% of that salary. So hopefully that helps clarify.
We've also gotten a lot of questions very specific to individual projects. And as Jillian mentioned, it would likely be best if you want to talk about specifics of your application to schedule a call. There's information on our website about how to do so. But maybe just for purposes here, could you all offer a few examples of what this funding could be used for?
Sure, absolutely. There are several different ways that this funding can be used, and we have kept that intentionally pretty open. It can be used for general funding so long as it is focused on the marginalized communities exclusively. So depending on kind of what your programming looks like, it could be used in that way. It could also be used for project-based support, where you are looking to work directly with a community in some kind of project capacity. We do have some examples of that, including hiring a bilingual staff member to support older adults who speak another language to access services or conduct research. Could be general operating support to a senior center that is really focused on serving immigrant communities. A Meals on Wheels program that serves low-income, rural, homebound older adults. Could be used for general operating support for an organization focusing on serving low-income LGBTQ+ older adults, or to purchase culturally relevant foods or provide food deliveries to low-income older adult immigrant participants of Meals on Wheels. So those are a few examples, and of course the range is broad, and if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out.
Great, thank you, Jillian. Another question, how far along in equity efforts does an organization need to be to apply for funding? And this question came from someone who stated they were only beginning to address inequality within their organization.
Yeah, great. We're really open to requests from organizations who are even only beginning to address equity. You will need to demonstrate how and why you decided to focus on the populations you choose, and also demonstrate how you've already or you plan to build connection with that population. You would also need to demonstrate your organization's commitment to DEI. This doesn't mean you need to be far in your DEI journey, but you should be able to speak to how your organization is working to address DEI or implement DEI practices, or how you're starting that journey.
Great, thank you. Is citizenship necessary for funding?
No, we will not require any kind of citizenship check for funding.
Thank you. And this question has come in a few times, both in advance and now in the Q&A. What do we mean by frontier populations? How do we define that?
Good question. In general, frontier areas are sparsely populated rural areas, which are isolated from population centers and services. Frontier is often defined as counties having a population density of 6 or fewer people per square mile.
Great, thank you. With regard to serving 2 or more older adult populations, we have a question kind of curious about how this works. If the organization serves rural populations, but the goal of the grant is to focus on new LGBTQ+ initiative, does that meet the requirement?
Yes, so if the organization, if all of the individuals served are located rurally, and then you're looking even within that to expand to LGBTQ+ rural older adults, that would absolutely meet the criteria.
Are you providing preference to organizations that are less financially robust?
I don't think that we necessarily have a preference for that. I mean, I think we are looking at financial sustainability. We're looking at if you do have reserves, can you speak to why you have reserves or why you still need our funding for your project or program? But I don't think there's necessarily a preference either way.
Thank you. Is there a preferred grant funding amount that should be requested by applicants?
We do have the $100,000 maximum request, but from there, really, we want you to think about what it is that you need. I will say that we try to avoid partial funding as much as possible. So please think through what it is that you need to execute your project and request that amount. It's likely that partial funding would not be awarded, and so we encourage you to decide on, the number that you feel you really need to operate the programming, and then request that amount. And then you'll also want to take into consideration what your organizational budget looks like, and make a request that is kind of in line with the size of your organization. So you're not asking for 100% of your organizational budget or something along those lines. But that's kind of the advice we give. We don't have a specific number in terms of how much you should request.
And since you mentioned budgets, Jillian, do organizations have to submit a budget? And if so, is there a template to utilize?
No and no. Organizations do not have to submit unless you are a government entity that requires expenditure responsibility, in which case we can accept that budget and work with that. But if you are not a governmental organization, then we will not be requesting a project budget.
If the funding award will happen in November, when does funding start?
We will discuss that as soon as we have the kickoff call with you, if you are awarded, and we will work with you to determine when the start date works best. It would obviously be after November, but it could be January 1st if that works for your organization. But we'll talk that through during the kickoff call.
Will organizations not be considered if their program also serves other marginalized communities that aren't older adult communities? So they are served, but older adults are served, but not exclusively.
Yes, older adults need to be the exclusive focus of the project. So if your organization serves other younger populations, that's okay, of course, but you'll need to explain in your application how this specific grant request will be focused on older adults exclusively, and what your connection to those older adult populations are.
Great. A few questions coming in about the requirements in terms of eligibility. So the question is, suppose their board is made up of primarily seniors. but not necessarily a diverse population of older adults.
Yeah, for this funding opportunity, we really are focused on looking at the diversity of the board in terms of race. So unfortunately, it would not be considered for this particular funding opportunity.
A few questions here. Can salaried positions be funded?
Yes, salaried positions can be funded. And again, we won't ask for a project budget. So we will ask you to kind of outline how the funding will be used. And it's helpful if you can provide some level of detail about that, but it doesn't need to be a line by line budget. And we don't have specific requirements other than what was outlined in terms of what will not be funded. And if you missed that, you can go to our website and see a comprehensive list of that as well.
This gets maybe a little bit into someone needing to schedule a call, but are we open to funding a needs assessment so that an organization can better understand a community that they are trying to engage and provide services for?
Yes, we would consider a needs assessment. I would recommend having a call with us about that. I think we would want to still know the potential impact of the work that you're doing to improve the lives of older adults, particularly marginalized older adults for this project, for this funding opportunity. So I would definitely encourage you to schedule a discovery call.
A good question here about general operating support. So if an organization applies for general operations funding, how does it work with the fact that we want the fund to 100% be dedicated to a specific population?
We do want the funding to be exclusive to those populations. And so if you're able to demonstrate that your general operating requests will be exclusively focused on those populations, then it's certainly eligible. Again, for example, a rural low-income Meals on Wheels program that's requesting general operating support, that would probably be something that could be pretty easily explained. However, if your organization can't show that a general operating request would be focused specifically on those communities, then I would encourage you to narrow the request to a specific program or project that you were working on that is specifically dedicated to those communities.
And what if the program is intergenerational?
Good question. We would allow for an intergenerational program, but it would still need to be focused. Those older adults in the program do need to still meet the population served eligibility criteria. So they do need to be a part of one of those marginalized communities.
Is an audit needed to request over $30,000?
Yes, someone knows us well. That is exactly correct. Unless your organizational budget is under, is it 500,000?
500,000.
Okay, thank you, Sue. I'll let you, oh, you're off camera. Okay. Yeah, so if your organizational budget is 500,000 or less, then you can submit a financial compilation or financial review by a third party in place of an audit.
A few questions have come in about geographical restrictions in terms of where organizations need to be located in order to receive funding. Can we just talk a little bit about that as well?
We're open to grants from organizations across the country for this particular funding opportunity. As long as you are a US-based organization, you are and focused on the populations that we are intending to serve, you are eligible to apply.
Is there a preference for programs that provide direct service?
No, we don't have a preference. We'll just ask you about we'll just want to know about the impact of your work. And so you can speak to, your goals for improving the lives of older adults or any of the goals that align with the goals of Next 50 initiative and how you hope to accomplish those. But we don't have priority areas in terms of direct service or otherwise.
Would the HIV positive community be considered a marginalized community for this funding opportunity?
Yeah, I think that if you can, I think we leave our definition of those living with a cognitive physical disability is fairly open. I think as long as you can demonstrate that the illness affects or interferes with activities of daily living, then it could qualify as one of those population criteria requirements.
We've got a few requests in here to repeat the requirements regarding leadership of an organization, specifically around board. So we might repeat that if we can, but then also another question, kind of in addition to that, if the board is 100% represents refugee and immigrant communities, but not many marginalized population, would we consider this application? So maybe just repeat those requirements and answer that question.
Sure. So I will read the criteria there in terms of the CEO leadership board makeup. If your organization's CEO, executive director, and or 51% or more of your organization's leadership team or board identify as people of color, your organizational focus, oh, here we go, and or eligible program or project can focus on one or more of the populations listed below. So your focus of the population served would still need to meet one of these criteria, but if your CEO 50 or 51% or more of your leadership team or board identify as people of color, then you can focus on just one. So in terms of immigrant or refugee, so for the purposes of this particular funding opportunity, really focused on people of color in terms of leadership. And so you would need to meet the criteria of people of color rather than any of the other criteria listed here. And that's something that we've determined just for this funding opportunity. So if you can, kind of think through that lens for that, that would tell you whether or not your leadership or board would make you eligible for funding in that way.
Sue, this is maybe a quick question for you. We have Sue Shea on the call as well. She's our Director of Finance and Accounting to help with some of the financial stuff. But do we offer resources or referrals for organizations that conduct financial reviews, or could we provide that information?
We don't, but I could provide some information, but it would be any certified public accountant or an individual or a company that is certified.
Great, thank you. This has come in a few times as well. Are capital projects eligible for consideration?
Capital projects are eligible. Again, it would be about really looking at that population served. So you'll need to look at it through that lens. If it's a building or something like that, it might be more difficult if you're focusing on a broad range of folks that will be utilizing the building or that particular space. So really think through your request through the lens of the population served first. I think that will be most helpful for those types of requests.
Thank you, group. If an organization applied for another one of our funding opportunities this year, but don't know yet whether or not they've received that award, are they eligible to apply for this as well?
You can apply for this request regardless. If you are funded in our flexible support or advancing innovation opportunity, you will not be eligible for funding for advancing equity. You should have heard back by now for your flexible support application. So if you have not heard back, please reach out to us so that we can make sure and get that information to you. And otherwise for advancing innovation, it will be a while before you hear back. And so you can certainly apply for both opportunities, but we would only be awarded in one opportunity.
Could you describe a little further how Next 50 Initiative defines disability for this grant?
Yes, happy to. I think that we've left the definition broad, so we want folks to make the case if it's a chronic illness, such as there's so many Parkinson's, MS, dementia, that could be considered a disability. Hearing and vision impairment could be considered a disability. So we really leave it up to our applicants to speak to that and make that case.
Going back to the qualifications for this, lots of questions coming in again about the board. One of the questions is if the board or leadership is not 51%, if 51% of the board or leadership are not people of color, is an organization unable to apply?
Oh, no, that's only one option of how to submit an application. So regardless of the makeup of your board and leadership, you can apply if you're able to focus exclusively on 2 or more of these marginalized communities. And we anticipate that most requests will fit into that category where it's really a focus on 2 or more marginalized communities, regardless of the makeup of your board or executive leadership. However, if your board or executive leadership does meet that criteria, then you only need to meet one of the criteria for marginalized population.
And just to make sure with those 2 or more, is it an and/or situation, or does it have to be both?
Can you reword that? Oh, or maybe you understood.
No, can you reword that?
Sure. I think the question is really related to, so if they select communities of color and LGBTQ plus identifying, does that have to be an intersectional identity, or can it be a focus on those 2 populations that maybe there isn't that overlap, if that makes sense?
Jillian, you want to take this one?
Yes, so we're really looking through an intersectional lens, and so hope that individuals as a part of the program would meet an intersectional identity there with both. However, it's a bit broader than that in that there may be low income criteria, there may be rural, you may serve a population that reaches so many of these different communities that it doesn't have to be that every single person is necessarily LGBTQ plus person of color. But we really would like all of the recipients of the services through the grant to meet 2 or more criteria. So it could be kind of a mixture of what those marginalized communities are, but that is our hope there.
Would DEIA training for staff and/or volunteers be allowable within this grant?
Yes, I think it could be allowable as a component of your request. I think that it would be more of a challenge if the funding wasn't directly benefiting the older adults themselves. So I think that if it was part of your request and it's part of increasing your capacity to serve marginalized older adults, then that would work.
Do we intend to offer partial funding at all?
It is possible that a partial award could be made, but it is something that we really try to avoid. And we will not be asking for a project budget for this. And so what we'd really like for you to do is let us know how much it is that you need to accomplish your goals. And then typically it will be an all or nothing award. And so if you can please think through that and narrow that down on your end, that would be helpful for us, as we don't want to make arbitrary partial awards.
So this one, excuse me, might be another one where it's good for them to schedule a call, but it says their organization is housed at a university, fiscally managed apparently by a university. Would this exclude them from eligibility?
I don't think so, but correct me if I'm wrong.
I would encourage a call, just because it kind of depends on how you're connected to the university. If you're an entity of the university, you would be excluded. But there may be some exceptions if it's a fiscal sponsorship or something like that.
Would educating elected officials about needed programs and resources for older adults be an eligible activity under this request?
As long as it is focused again on those marginalized communities, you'd really need to be looking at marginalization, and as long as it's not lobbying for a particular political position, it could potentially be eligible.
This question has come in a lot, and I can certainly take it if you all want to, but I'll let you start it. Lots of questions about whether or not this funding opportunity will be available again in subsequent years, given that funding is only 1 year. And I'm happy to answer that if you all would not want to.
Sure, go for it.
Our funding strategy or grant making opportunities, at least for next year, aren't finalized just yet, but we'll be releasing those. Our hope is really to continue learning from the opportunities that we have presented this year. And so we'll learn through the process of receiving applications. We'll learn through the process of the awards that we make, and we'll continue to look at the need for this type of funding. I think from my perspective, and certainly from this organizational perspective, we need to continue to have an intentional focus on these marginalized communities so that we can ensure that our funding is going to help diminish those issues or obstacles or barriers or whatever you want to call them to older adults with intersectional identities really accessing quality care and services. So it's a non-answer answer. Stay tuned for more information, but we will be utilizing everything we do this year to continue to learn. Hopefully that helps answer that a little bit. Does being a past Next 50 grant recipient play any role in the decision making?
It will not, no, unless you've been awarded in flexible support or in advancing innovation, it will not impact your request at all.
Could older adults who were formerly incarcerated, justice involved, or in recovery be considered a marginalized community?
Yes, I think so. We have a criteria on our marginalization list for other, and so you can also just enter that in and speak to the marginalization of the community that you serve. In addition, I think oftentimes incarcerated populations will fit several of the other criteria that are listed, and so you can kind of come at it from that angle as well.
And I think we've come up as a couple of times, but specifically, what would be other categories that fit into the other category of marginalized communities?
Yeah, I mean, we leave it open for folks to make a case if there is a population you're working with that you feel is marginalized in another way. You can make that case in your application. I think formerly incarcerated is a great one. Also experiencing homelessness could be one. Someone earlier mentioned HIV plus population. So you could certainly make that case, particularly around HIV plus. You could talk about the stigma that folks experience and the barriers to healthcare and all of that. So it's really up to you to make that case.
I'll add to that we have listed out our definition of marginalized. And so if you look at that definition and take that into consideration, then if you can explain how the group you're serving meets that criteria, then we would certainly consider it.
And I think what I'll add more, the reason that we offered another category is we wanted to acknowledge we don't know it all, right? And these are the populations that we think are most historically marginalized, but we want to hear more information from your organization about who you're serving and how that fits within that definition as well. Do we require matching funds?
No, we do not require matching funds.
I might need some more information about this question, but they want to understand how admin costs come into play. So I'm assuming can administrative costs be included in the request?
So yes, I mean, they can be. We don't have, we're not going to ask for a specific project budget. So you can just kind of give us the overview of what you are requesting in terms of how the funding will be used. But the catch is that, of course, the population served needs to be meeting the criteria that we've been discussing. And so if you can explain how, maybe you work for an organization where the entirety of the focus is on 2 or more marginalized communities, then admin costs would be completely appropriate. Whereas if your organization serves a broader range of individuals and they don't all meet that criteria, then that might be more of a challenging request to get through.
I'm going to keep asking the questions that are coming in about the population requirement, because I think that's the trickiest piece for people to understand. And I think it's important for us to state too, that we know this is narrow and it is intentionally so. So I understand where the questions are coming from, and I want to try to get to as many of those as possible. But just know that we understand this is a narrow funding opportunity, and we intentionally created it as such. So there's a question about if you're serving individuals of color and immigrants or refugees, does it have to be a particular percentage of who your programs serve, i.e. 50% or more?
No. So for example, if you are wanting to implement a program specifically for that population, then that's totally fine. It doesn't need to be 50% of the entire population you serve, as long as it's focused on that population. If your organization broadly serves immigrants and refugees, then that's fine too. That works too. You could come in for general operating if you're focused on older adults in that category.
What income level do we consider low income? So many older adults are struggling and are considered kind of part of that missing middle and do not qualify for benefits, but also don't have enough income to make ends meet.
Yes, and we sure understand that. And so we leave it to organizations to define low income. We don't have a standard definition of low income that we use.
Do we require letters of support? And if not required, can an organization submit one or more anyway?
We don't require letters of support for this funding opportunity. If you would like to submit letters of support, you certainly can as a supplemental document. So that's up to you, but it's not a requirement.
Answer that one. Sorry, just going through. A question about the 80-20 Colorado national split and how that might come into play here.
I don't anticipate that it will come into play here. We are accepting applications from across the country. And even though we have this 80-20 split, it's actually a pretty complicated formula that doesn't end up meaning, per grant opportunity, it needs to be 80-20 or something along those lines. So all applications, regardless of where they are located in the United States, will be considered equally.
Could the funds be used to provide a stipend to community members or pay for training for community members that would be caregivers? So the community members themselves, who would be caregivers, are people of color, immigrants, and speak the language of the seniors we seek to serve. So I think the question is related to training for a caregiver population.
Yes, you can certainly apply for stipends. It cannot be, we can't pay cash, I don't think, but we can certainly allow for gift cards and things like that for incentives for programs like that.
If an organization is funded through this opportunity, does it make them ineligible for other Next 50 funding opportunities?
Yes and no. I mean, this is the last opportunity of this year. And so if you have not been funded in flexible support this year or in advancing innovation, then you will be eligible for the advancing equity opportunity. So you can only be eligible for one opportunity, but because this is the final of the year, you would know that ahead of time. Also, we do have an opportunity for something that we call SUN grants, sudden and urgent need grants, that you can look at on our website, and that opportunity you can apply for as well. So should you be funded in advancing equity, if you meet the qualifications for our SUN grant opportunity, then you would still be eligible to apply for that one as well.
Are there any reporting requirements for this funding opportunity?
Typically we do a check-in call 6 months into the grant. It's a very informal conversation with the organization about progress made towards goals, any challenges you're experiencing or anything like that. And then we will have a final report at the end of the grants. And we will discuss all of that in the kickoff call and give you all that information so that you are prepared for that report.
Can salaried positions be funded?
Yes, as long as the marginalized communities are being served, then there's no limit around that.
Can this funding support pilot programs or research that's part of a larger project?
Yes, again, impact to older adults will be reviewed, so you'll need to demonstrate the potential impact of the research to improve the lives of the older adults. Pilot projects, if you're seeing that your the community that you intend to serve needs something specific based on their intersectional identities or the barriers that they face, then I think it makes sense to apply for a project that meets those needs, even if it is a pilot project.
Can a nonprofit that is less than 1 year old still apply?
Yes, as long as you have your 501c3 or whatever it might be status, you can apply. You are also can use a fiscal sponsor if needed. We will look at your financial history, and so that can be one of the challenges in terms of younger organizations, and so it may be beneficial to have a fiscal sponsor, but you're certainly eligible to apply as long as you have the nonprofit status in place.
Will we allow subcontracts with key partners?
We don't allow for sub-grants, so you cannot receive NFI funding and then re-grant the funds to another organization or individuals. We do allow for subcontracts through collaborative partnerships, but one organization still will need to be fiscally responsible and responsible for reporting.
If awarded funding through this opportunity, are organizations allowed to receive grants from other funders for the same services?
Absolutely, yeah.
If someone is in the process of establishing a 501c4, can they still apply?
You would need to have your 501c4 status at the time that you apply.
Unless you're applying through a fiscal sponsor.
Right.
And that would be acceptable as well.
How recent should audits be?
Sue.
Not older than 12/31/2020. So it has to be more recent than that.
Here's another question, Sue, you can stick around for. How is reimbursement done for those that are funded? Is it at the beginning of the grant, quarterly, etc.?
Say that again, reimbursement?
Yeah, how do we provide the funds to organizations?
So once it's been approved and the grant agreement is signed off on both sides, then we will fund within a couple weeks.
All right, perfect. Sorry, I'm looking at all these questions. A lot of questions very specific to particular organizations' applications. And for those, we really just request that you reach out and talk with someone at Next 50 Initiative. It's easier to have those questions and dive into some of those specifics, because I think we can infer a lot through this, through just a typed question that maybe we aren't getting fully. So I think it's best to do that. Is this funding open to local government offices and agencies? I think we talked about this a bit in the PowerPoint.
Yes, it is.
For organizations that have been funded in years past with a good relationship with Next 50, will this have any impact on the decision? We maybe touched on this as well.
We are open to organizations that have been funded before and organizations that have not. There's really some great benefits to both. And so neither are preferred over the other. Both are preferred.
If an organization is seeking to change the narrative or perspective addressing inequities in marginalized rural communities serving older adults, would we consider funding broader range collaborative efforts to communicate, educate, and hopefully bring light to those inequities? So essentially being a model and catalyst for positive change in rural marginalized population and community, and communicating for those who feel they don't matter or have a voice.
Yes, although I would really encourage a discovery call with one of us.
Great. This is a interesting question, and I don't know if we're giving if we have a ballpark for that, but we could probably lean into other opportunities this year to answer. Approximately how many applications do we expect for this funding opportunity?
Yeah, this is the first time that we've done this specific funding opportunity, and so it's hard to say specifically. We did have a funding opportunity, flexible support, earlier this year. It was Colorado only, and we received 18 million in requests, and we had 3 million to grant out. And so that just kind of gives you an idea of what it's looked like in the past this year. We have 2 million to award for this grant opportunity. We don't know how much we will receive, but we anticipate it will be quite competitive.
Great. There are a couple of questions, and I know we're going to get to that in a second, about the application portal that we require applicants to use. And I would again suggest that organizations reach out if they're having some technical difficulties with some aspects of that. We'll talk about that in just one second, but that would be a good outreach as well, and we can get you connected to the right person there. A question about discovery calls. Do we encourage discovery calls for everyone, or do those who make discovery calls gain any advantage?
I think we highly encourage a discovery call. I think it helps us get to know you a little better and for you to understand our priority a little better. Obviously, we might run out of space for discovery calls. So if that's the case, then it's not necessarily going to hurt your application if you weren't able to get in to talk to one of us.
All right. Well, we've gotten to many questions, and I apologize if we haven't gotten to your question specifically, but I just want to thank you all again so much for participating. We have a couple other pieces of information for you before we sign off. So we'll have Amy put that back up.
Great. Well, we wanted to just provide some information about our new grants management system. We did transition to a new grant portal called Flux in May. We're hoping that it's more user-friendly and a more streamlined experience for our applicants. All new grant applications and all future reporting requirements must be submitted through the new grants portal. So for next steps, if you haven't yet, register on the new site. If you have applied to us before, select reset or create password at the bottom left of the screen, and then enter the same email address you used to access your account on our old portal, and then follow the instructions in the email to create your password. If you have not applied to us before, you can go to this link and then select create a new account now and enter your information. But please note, it can take up to 2 days for a new account to be approved. So please register ahead of time and don't leave that step to August 15th or 16th.
So here are some next steps that we recommend for folks. Go to our website. That's really the main thing that you can do, and take a look over all of the guidelines, the application, and the tip sheet. We do have a tip sheet linked on the website, and then you can review the questions for the application on a Word document that is attached on our website as well. We do have a Spanish version available as well. And then actually go to, of course, the Flux portal as Ruth described, to submit the application itself. We mentioned several times that we recommend discovery calls for folks. These are not required, but I do think they can be helpful for applicants. And if you have any questions about, your specific grant that you're hoping to apply for, we can talk through those in detail with you in that way. And here are some instructions of how to do that. Their calls do book up, so I would recommend booking those sooner than later. And again, before you apply, please create or access your account in the new grant portal just to make sure that it is up and running before the deadline. And you can again begin your application offline using the Word version, and then copy and paste that into the Flex portal if you prefer to do it that way. And be sure to save your application often once you get into that Flex portal.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning. We hope that the information provided has been helpful to you as you consider applying for the Advancing Equity and Aging funding opportunity. Again, if you have any remaining questions, please reach out to schedule a discovery call. And we're going to go ahead and end the recording now. So have a great rest of your day and week.